Thank you, Nan.
Yeah. Oh, I'll take that too.
Oh, you want this?
No.
You guys probably hear me without this thing, probably. We'll put it up here. See where we're at. Whichever way it fits on there. All right. Well, I didn't know I was really going to be doing it today here, but you guys know how this thing came about. Is we had a board meeting, but it was by phone, and my phone kicked off, and I had to call back in. And when I called back in, Jody tells me, "Oh, and by the way, Mike, we didn't hear from you, so we volunteered you to go ahead and do this." Vishu tells me yesterday, he says, "Oh yeah, you're sitting next to me today too, so come on over." So, anyways, this is regarding Proposition 1, and I did a little research on a few things here too, and I'll go over with you too on this. But what Prop 1 does for California veterans and families and seniors and people with disabilities? It dedicates funding to help military veterans have a safe place to call home, provide stable housing for seniors, struggling families, people experience homelessness, and individuals with disabilities, builds affordable homes for hardworking people like grocery workers, nurses' aides, teaching assistants, helps people live in the communities where they work and serve while they still have money for basics like groceries, medications, and child care. Tackles top priorities for Californians, building homes, creating jobs, and boosting the economy. It's expected to create 137,000 jobs and pump $23.4 million into California's economy. Now, why Californians need this affordable housing is because the housing crisis is crushing the 1 in 3 Californians who cannot afford their rents. Many people are spending more than 30% of their incomes, and some as much as 50% of the incomes on housing. The gap is so wide between what Californians earn and the cost of rent that seniors and families are separated by long commutes because they cannot afford to live in the cities where they work. California has the largest population of unsheltered veterans in the nation. Seniors and families are being pushed to the brink and live in their cars or double and even triple up in overcrowded housing as they try to keep a roof over their heads, maintain their jobs, and ensure their children and grandchildren get to go to school. So, as I read that over, I looked at it, and I thought personally as far as things I dealt with. And I worked with the union office for 42 years before I retired 3 years ago, negotiating contracts and stuff up and down the Central Valley from Bakersfield to the Oregon border, whether it be field pack workers or grocery workers or meat packing houses, poultry plants, or whatever. And when it said something about those that were living in their cars, I come across folks that were looking for work that were literally living in their station wagons. Why? Because they couldn't afford. They couldn't afford to get a place to rent. They could probably get a hotel once, a little motel or something, once a week, just take a nice shower and everything else. But other than that, they were living in their cars. If you look as far as rents, if you look at as far as in the Central Valley throughout, and even across California, our average hourly wage rate that a lot of the folks are having is $14 an hour is the average. And if you take that as a 40-hour work week of $560 a week, and then you minus your taxes and your cost of insurance that you have to pay to take care of your medical, you're at about $300 to $400 a week is what you're bringing home. And if you look at that, that's $1,500 a month. If you're a vet, and vets have come back from the military, come back from overseas, Afghanistan or whatever, some of our vets are coming back with disabilities of 20%, 30% disability, but as much as 70% disability, and what they receive is $1,500 a month. If you're an average on Social Security, you're getting $1,372 a month from Social Security on an average. And if you look at those figures that I just put you, the same figure comes out all the time. Almost $1,500 is what people receive a month, is what you're going to get. And when we talk about affordable housing for rent and how to keep the rents down so people can afford their rent, the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment is $950. If you got a family and you need a 3-bedroom apartment, it's $1,500. So to me, it seems like our government and everybody else out there wants to keep everybody at one little level, and that's it. So it's going to be up to us, everyone here, and like he said, you got the phone call, you got the door knocking, is go ahead and push this through as far as with, let's get this money out there and put to where we're supposed to put this. Take care of our folks out there, our vets, those folks that are working hard trying to afford their housing. So with that, as far as, with contacting your supervisors and stuff and saying, hey, we've got these propositions out there, let them know too. Can you live on $18,000 or $25,000 a month? Because that's what you're expecting the working class person out there to live on. They cannot do it. They would sit there in their own office chair and they would have to tell themselves that they can't do it, so they're going to have to do something too to help out. So with that, I would just say, how can you support with Prop 1? Help spread the word among your family and your friends, your neighbors, and your colleagues that we all can do something about the housing crisis. Thank you.
I'll just jump in here.
Just jump in.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Vishnu. I'm the organizer for the Central Valley for CARA. I would like to talk to you about Prop 2. So Prop 2 asks the question if housing constitutes a service when it comes to homelessness and mental illness. So let me ask people here a question. How many would say that when you're providing services to the mentally ill, housing should be one of those services? Okay, yeah, so a lot of you here. How many of you would say that services for the mentally ill should be only social services, psychological services, medical services, and not housing? Okay, no one here. So that's the whole question behind Proposition 2, right? In 2004, Senator Steinberg up in Sacramento put on the ballot and was able to pass Prop 63. This was a 1% income tax to folks earning more than $1 million around the state. And it was for providing services for people with mental illnesses. So they passed this proposition in 2004. And then a couple of years ago in Sacramento, the legislature passed a bill to build housing that includes mental health and other services to chronically homeless residents. And they wanted to access that 2004 Prop 63 funds. But of course, then someone, a group filed a lawsuit, and the lawsuit says the voters approved Prop 63 for mental health services, but that does not include building homes and building housing. So that's why now we have Prop 2 on the ballot. At CARA, we have taken the position that housing is a critical element of providing services to the mentally ill. If you don't have a home and a stable place to live in, it's going to be hard for you to get the treatment and services you need to deal with mental illness. Individuals with mental illness, substance abuse, victims of domestic violence have been forced to live in the streets without housing and a lack of services. Housing for this population has to be coupled with the services so they can be successful in solving both their housing issues as well as mental health issues. Many counties have already identified sites, if you can believe this, they have places in different counties all over the state, and these developments are basically, they have the place where they're going to build these housings, all they need is the money. So a yes on Prop 2 will release $2 billion to communities that can move forward to build housing with services needed to address our homelessness problem in California. So I looked up who supports this bill. Not only organizations like us, which support seniors and people with disabilities, but it includes groups like the Police Officers Association, the California Labor Federation, the National Institute of Mental Health. So they note that Prop 2 means building 20,000 permanent supportive housing units under the No Place Like Home program. This allows coordinated care of mental health and substance use services, medical care, case managers, education, and job training to help people get the treatment and housing stability they need. Decades of research shows that providing people with a stable place to live with mental health services provides healthy, stable lives, right? I mean, I asked many of you here, it made sense to you, the research supports it. They point out that this proposition, and it really does not cost us any more money, right? They're using funds that have been available from Prop 63, and it's just sitting there. We just need to access it. Someone filed a lawsuit. They want to hear from the people of California. So CARA is supporting Prop 2. If you care about reducing homelessness, if you care about people who are mentally ill getting the services, we need to start with housing. That's why we need to vote yes on Prop 2, get the word out. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I am Fran Smith. I'm a board member of CARA. I'm one of the few board members who represents a community-based organization. So I attached to a little nonprofit in Yolo County. And most of my adult life, I worked for nonprofits. And I worked with really nice people, really good people. But when it came to talking to policymakers and standing up for rights, they were a little soft. When I came to CARA, I felt like I had found my people, because we're the ones who fight hard for things. I'm not a baby boomer. I'm a depression baby, if you can tell by the color of my hair, much older than most baby boomers. When I was a child, we moved a lot. I went to 17 schools because my stepfather went where the jobs were during World War II. I ended up in 1949 at Manteca High, and I graduated from Manteca High. I have an AA degree from Modesto Junior College, and right from there I started teaching in Ceres, California. So I consider myself a Valley girl, and today I feel like I'm back home. I'm here to talk to you about the problems with the dialysis companies. When this issue first came, when Prop 8 came to the CARA Legislative Committee, and we heard with many of the problems with the dialysis corporations, insufficient time to clean equipment between patients, I naively asked, well, why doesn't the state enforce regulations? And Jody looked at me and said, come on, Fran, they're their own corporations. There are no regulations. There are no rules for dialysis companies. Anybody here in the room who's my age or close to my age might remember a cartoon in the funny papers. There ought to be a law. There'd be a picture of some crazy, awful situation, and the guy in the corner would shout, there ought to be a law. And that's what we're talking about here today. You've got a fact sheet in your paper about all the problems with dialysis corporations. Last week we had one of these meetings in Richmond, and there was a young lady there who's a technician at one of the DaVita dialysis places in Richmond. And she talked about the shortage of equipment at that center, because sometimes they have to borrow equipment from someplace else. She talked about the shortage of staff. She talked about the rush to move patients out as soon as their treatment was over, to get them out as quickly as possible. She talked about the lack of time to attend to a patient if there was a problem during their treatment. They just had to get them off the table, move them, and get the next person in. She talked about the lack of sanitation in these blood. By the way, dialysis is taking your dirty blood out of your body and cleaning it and putting it back in. So there's a lot of room for infection there. She talked about the lack of attention to sanitation, blood stains and cockroaches in the centers. I mean, we're talking about human beings here. We're talking about life support, and there are no regulations over these for-profit corporations. She told us also that staff was forbidden from making complaints ever. There's nobody to complain to. So CARA has brought this to your attention. The vote, the description that you have in front of you describes the high profit margins that these for-profit corporations collect. They do not spend money to ensure the safety of their patients. Rather, they spend their profit on perks for the executives. Insurance companies, $150,000 a year for treatment for people who need dialysis. And the premiums are high for those health plans. The markup, it's a 350% markup from the cost of providing care. And the insurance companies pay the cost, but that cost is spread to everybody else who's got an insurance with that insurance company. There are more than 477,000 people today in the United States who depend on dialysis to keep alive. That's not even talking about the people who may need that service in the future. Yeah, this is a crazy situation. If there was ever a time to shout, there ought to be a law, that time is now. Prop 8 will push the for-profit dialysis corporations to spend more money on direct patient care. It would limit the amount of administrative overhead the company can take out of the fees for service. It would reduce the cost of the care. When we stop dialysis companies from overcharging, we can bring down the cost of health care premiums for all of us. So CARA stands up for what's right. This is one of the things that's right. If you think about, Vishnu talked about who's in support of Prop 8. Well, if the people who get dialysis know about Prop 8, they would probably support it. But that number is not as big a number as it's going to take to pass Prop 8. So that's why we're asking you, vote yes on Prop 8. That's why we're asking you to talk to your friends and neighbors about the importance of this. You've got the cards in your packet, so please spread them around. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Joe Carson, and I'm with the Central Valley Cat. And when Vishnu called me and asked me to speak about Proposition 10, I said, "But Vishnu, I'm so confused." And I really was, because I knew I would vote for it because Kara supported it. And if I don't know anything else, I go with what Kara says. But in reading the articles in the paper and what I heard about it, I thought, well, why do we want to repeal Costa-Hawkins if it's rent control? Well, it's not. So I'm going to start by reading the official ballot statement. This bill, this proposition, would repeal state law that currently restricts the scope of rent control policies that cities and other local jurisdictions may impose. It allows policies that would limit the rental rates that residential property owners may charge for new tenants, new construction, and single-family homes. In accordance with California law, it provides that rent control policies may not violate landlords' rights to a fair financial return on their property. So landlords are protected by this proposition too. Now, here's what I want to tell you. Costa-Hawkins is currently law in California, and this is where it came from and what it did. In 1995, the legislature passed the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act that placed limits on the ability of cities in California to implement rent control. This was in response to local cities, Santa Monica, West Hollywood, Berkeley, East Palo Alto, and Cotati, who passed a rent control law that included vacancy control. Now, vacancy control capped the amount a landlord could increase the rent when a tenant moved out of a rental unit, not just the amount that they could raise on occupied units. Costa-Hawkins specifically prohibited vacancy control so that no local ordinance could cap the amount of rent charged once a tenant moves out. So let's get this tenant out and we'll jack up the rent about $500. In addition, the law prohibits cities from enacting rent control on units constructed after 1995. So if there's apartment complex built in 1996, rent control doesn't apply. And it established rent control from expanding to those laws to buildings constructed after the date the original rent control ordinance was enacted. For example, Los Angeles enacted a rent control law in 1978. Anything built after 1978 does not come under rent control. San Francisco enacted a law in 1979. As tenants vacate units in these 5 cities with vacancy control, landlords may increase the rent on those units to market value. Okay, so what does Proposition 10 do? Prop 10 would repeal Costa-Hawkins. And we know the situation with people struggling with housing. Across California, people are struggling to stay in their homes as developers and landlords and Wall Street speculators are given free rein over our cities. So people we find people moving to Stockton when they work in San Francisco because they can't afford housing. So commutes are longer. Seniors, veterans, and people with disabilities live in fear of losing their home and their health due to uncontrolled rent increases, harassment by landlords, unattended maintenance problems, and evictions. This didn't just happen naturally. In 1995, the Costa-Hawkins Rental Act put limits on how Californians could address the housing crisis and protect residents from displacement. So, Costa-Hawkins prevents cities from implementing rent control for single-family homes, condominiums, apartments built after 1995. Costa-Hawkins prohibits cities from establishing rent control laws prior to the Acts of Passage in 1995 for expanding rent control. Costa-Hawkins prohibits cities from implementing strict rent control known as vacancy control. Landlords can raise the rental price to any amount following a tenant's vacancy. Proposition 10 would repeal this act, would remove the current restrictions, and give cities and counties the power and the ability to implement rent control as they choose. It does not require counties to enact rent control or expand existing rent control laws. It just gives municipalities the ability to enact laws that make sense for their communities. So, the supporters for the repeal of Costa-Hawkins are several. There's AIDS Healthcare Foundation, the Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment, California Nurses Association, and tenant and community groups, and it should say CARA. Opponents of Proposition 10 include California Apartment Owners Association, the State Building and Construction Trade Council, and property trusts and real estate groups. Voters would approve the repeal of the Costa-Hawkins Act, or a vote yes means that voters would approve the repeal of the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act, allowing local governments to adopt laws and regulations to govern how much landlords can charge tenants for renting apartments and houses. How many of you here are renters? Yeah. This is for your protection. This is for your protection. Some of us are lucky enough to have been able to buy a home, and we still support this.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to take if you look in your little red bag, you'll see a bunch of our slate cards. We're going to talk about what to do with those in a moment, but you'll notice that we have taken a position not just on these 4 measures that were presented to you, but on 10 of the 11 ballot measures. So there are now 11 state ballot measures that will be before you in November or earlier. How many of you vote absentee, just out of curiosity? All right, so this is why, as Nan said at the beginning, we're doing this a little earlier than most people do, because most of our folks do vote absentee, and those ballots are going to be sent the first week in October. So if we waited 2 months, another couple of weeks, it'd be too late, right? Because people will have already voted. So we took a position on all but one, which we could not come to agreement on, and that was daylight savings time. So you're on your own. If you want to keep it the way it is and change your clocks all the time, you should vote against this. And if you want to just keep one standard time and not have to go back and forth, then you should vote for it. So you guys figure that one out.
All I knew it was my nap time.
We couldn't come to an agreement, so we just said, when we can't come to an agreement as an organization, we take no position. So we're leaving it in your capable hands. The other ballot measure that was going to be on the November ballot and got withdrawn, some of you heard about this, was to divide California into 3 states. Well, the author of that initiative, who spent his own money to put this on the ballot, realized there weren't a lot of people jumping up and down to do that, and so he withdrew it, so it will not be on your ballot in November. All the rest of them are on, we have taken positions on, and you can see our recommendations on your slate card. So we're open to taking questions on any of these 4 that you were presented, or if there's the other one that you're not sure about, we'll answer questions on that too. Okay.
My name is Frances Lopez, and I just want to say to all the renters in the room, I'm currently a homeowner here in Modesto, but I lived in rent-control cities from the age of 20 until the age of 58, and that saved my you-know-what. So I firmly believe in rent control.
Well, thank you. And I did want to say one other thing about rent control and homeowners. So I live in the most expensive city in the country right now, San Francisco. And I was a renter for years and years and years. And then I don't know how it happened, because I never wanted to be a homeowner. But I thank my lucky stars every day that 25 years ago, we figured out how to put some money down by borrowing from family and everybody we knew to buy a house. And if it weren't for being able to do that, we would be long gone. Because in my city, the average cost for a studio apartment now is $3,000. $3,000. So when you see all these people heading to the Bay Area on Highway 99, they're heading to San Francisco. The person at Safeway, my local Safeway, who I've known since he was a bagger and is now the shop steward, and he grew up in San Francisco, but when he got married and had a child, they could not afford to live there. So he lives in Turlock, and he drives to San Francisco to go to work. He never gets to see his kid grow up. He's on the road all the time because he cannot afford to live in the city where he works. And so this is a homeowner issue. It's a community issue. It's not just the renters who are trying to find a way to let cities help them stay where they are. But this messes up all of our communities. It puts more cars on the roads, commuting from Turlock to San Francisco to take a job because they can't afford to live in the city where they work. And that makes all of our lives more miserable because we're having to deal with that congestion on the road. But it also, it upends communities, because people are coming and going all the time. You can't build a sense of community when there's constant displacement and when you don't know your neighbors. I live in a residential part of San Francisco, and my kids grew up there, and for the first few years that I lived there, people had been there for many, many years. Now every single month, it seems like, somebody's moving out of one of my next door neighbors' homes, and somebody else is moving in because the cost of housing is ridiculous. And this is hitting everybody. Now the cost of housing in the valley is going up because we just keep pushing our problems further and further away. So it's everybody's issue, not just renters' issues. All right, other comments or questions? Yeah.
I have a question about Proposition 1. So when the $4 billion, if we get it, comes down, is there any guarantee written that the money is going to go to the housing? How is it written that allocated $4 billion is definitely going to be used for housing? I'm asking because I come from Turlock, which is south of here, and in Turlock they were given, I think, like $1.5 or $2 million to build housing, affordable housing, and then it never got built. So that
Yeah.